At 72 years old, she stood on the sidewalk with nothing but a suitcase. Her own son had just kicked her out. After raising him, sacrificing for him, loving him like her own, he threw her away like she was nothing. But what he didn't know? She was secretly worth $9.5 million, and with one quiet move, she made sure he'd never see a dime. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about karma. And it hits hard. At 72 years old, Margaret Dawson found herself standing on the edge of the driveway, her hands trembling, clutching a worn-out suitcase. The wheels squeaked as she slowly turned and looked at the house behind her. Her house. Or at least it had been for over 3 decades. Now the front door was closed, slammed, shut in her face by the very boy she had raised as her own. That boy was now a man, Nathan, her adopted son. The child she had loved, sheltered, and protected from the world. The one she had carried through every scraped knee, every parent-teacher conference, every tear-filled night after nightmares. And today, that same son had coldly looked her in the eye and said, "You're a burden, Margaret. I didn't ask for this. You need to go. No hug, no goodbye, just coldness." The wind tugged at her scarf as she stepped away from the home where she had celebrated birthdays, lit Christmas trees, and made Nathan's favorite spaghetti on Fridays. Now she had nowhere to go. No plan, no comfort. Just a single suitcase and decades of memories that suddenly felt like lies. She walked to the bus stop a few blocks down, head low, heart heavy. Passers-by barely noticed her. Just another old woman, with tired eyes and no place to be. But what they, and especially Nathan, didn't know was that Margaret Dawson was far from helpless. Because hidden beneath her modest life, behind the second-hand clothes and the tiny pension check, Margaret had a secret. One she had carefully protected for over 20 years. She was worth $9.5 million, yes. Million. Not inherited. Not from a lottery. But earned. Quietly. Decades ago, long before adopting Nathan, Margaret had worked in real estate. She had flipped properties when nobody believed in her, saved every penny, bought low, sold high. And when she sold her last major property, she quietly moved the money into carefully hidden investments, private accounts, and even a safety deposit box. She told no one, not even Nathan. Why? Because Margaret believed in living simply. She didn't want attention, didn't need fancy things. She wanted her son to grow up humble, grateful, but instead, he grew up entitled. And now, he had made a terrible mistake. He had cast aside the one person who would have given him the world. And while Margaret may have looked fragile walking down that cold sidewalk, her mind was sharp and her heart was firm. As she boarded the city bus, she didn't look back. She didn't cry again. She had already made a phone call to her old friend and lawyer, James Holloway, moments after Nathan kicked her out. "James," she said calmly, "it's time we change the will." And that's when the wheels of her quiet revenge began to turn. Margaret Dawson had always dreamed of being a mother. She tried for years, doctor visits, hopeful prayers, tearful nights, but motherhood never came the natural way. At 37, with no partner and no children, she made a life-changing decision. She would adopt. She didn't want a newborn or a perfect baby. She wanted a child who needed her, a child everyone else had overlooked. That's how she found Nathan. 5 years old. Wild brown curls, big eyes full of fear. He sat in the corner of the shelter, clutching a ragged teddy bear. His file said, "Severe trust issues, behavioral outbursts, trauma history." But Margaret didn't flinch. She saw through the labels and broken past. She saw a boy who just needed love, and she had more than enough to give. She brought him home to a small, cozy cottage on the edge of town. His first night, he screamed. He broke a lamp. He told her he hated her. She tucked him in anyway. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "No matter what." And she meant it. Over the years, Margaret gave Nathan everything she had, and then some. She worked long hours at the local community center to afford a better life for him. She enrolled him in private school, even when it meant skipping meals for herself. She bought him a bike for his 8th birthday, took him to the zoo every summer. She sat through awkward school plays and piano recitals where he hit every wrong note. She never missed a moment. When Nathan hit high school and started slipping, failing classes, Hanging out with the wrong crowd, Margaret didn't give up. She went to the school every week, met with counselors, even hired a tutor. When he got caught shoplifting, she was the one who picked him up from the police station at 1 a.m., heartbroken but calm. She never yelled. She never shamed him. Instead, she said, "You're better than this. I still believe in you." When Nathan dropped out of college in his second year, Margaret didn't cry. She simply helped him get a job at a friend's garage. She paid his rent until he was stable. She even co-signed a loan for his used car. Every time he fell, she picked him back up. And not once, not even once, did she ask for anything in return. All she wanted was to be loved back, respected, remembered for the sacrifices no one else had made. But as Nathan grew older, something changed. The gratitude faded. The warmth turned into coldness. He stopped visiting, stopped calling. Even when she grew ill, he only sent texts, short, careless, and distant. Margaret didn't say a word. She just waited, hoped, believed that maybe deep down the boy she raised was still in there. She didn't know it yet, but the time would come when all the love she gave would be forgotten, and everything she gave up would mean nothing to him. But life has a way of circling back. And Margaret's story was far from over. It started with a slight tremor in her hands, barely noticeable at first. Margaret brushed it off, thinking it was just old age catching up to her. But over the next few months, walking became harder. The stiffness in her joints worsened. She moved slower, needed more time to get out of bed, and finally, reluctantly, she began using a cane. It was a hard moment for her. She'd always been proud of being independent. Even at 72, she still cooked her own meals, paid her bills, and tended to her small backyard garden. But now, even making tea felt like a task. And for the first time in her life, she had to rely on someone else. She thought she could count on Nathan. After all, she'd raised him alone. She'd sacrificed vacations, friendships, and sometimes even food on her plate just to give him the best shot at life. Surely now that she needed a little help, he'd step up, just like she had done for him countless times. But she was wrong. At first, it was subtle. Nathan would sigh loudly when she asked for help with groceries. He'd roll his eyes when she asked him to drive her to the doctor. "You're not dying, Mom," he muttered once. "Stop acting like it's the end of the world." Then came the complaints about money. Every time a medical bill came in, his tone got sharper. "Why do these pills cost so much? Can't you ask for a cheaper one?" Or, "Do you really need to see a specialist?" He started locking himself in his room more, ignoring her calls from the living room. And when his girlfriend began staying over regularly, Margaret felt like a stranger in her own home. The tipping point came late one evening, after Margaret accidentally dropped a pot of soup in the kitchen. Her hands had given out. The noise startled everyone. Nathan stormed in, shouting, "What the hell, Mom? I'm trying to have dinner with Amanda and you're in here smashing stuff?" She apologized, tried to clean up, but he wasn't finished. "You know what? I didn't sign up to be your nurse. You're not helpless. Stop acting like it." The words hit her harder than any illness ever could. She stood silently, soup dripping onto her slippers, and felt the last bit of warmth in there. Relationship fade away. Still, she didn't lash out. She didn't remind him of the nights she stayed up while he had the flu, or the money she spent fixing his car, or the years of love and care she poured into his life. She still hoped, still believed, deep down, that maybe he was just stressed, that he'd realize how much she needed him, that the kind-hearted boy she raised wasn't gone. But Margaret was beginning to see a painful truth. When some people think you're weak, they stop seeing your worth. And soon, Nathan would make a decision he could never take back. It was a Friday afternoon, quiet, sunny, the kind of day that should have felt peaceful. Margaret had just finished folding the laundry, her favorite, floral mug warming her hand. She heard the front door open, and in walked Nathan, arm in arm with his girlfriend, Amanda. They didn't greet her. No smile, no kindness. Just a strange, uncomfortable silence. Then, without warning, Nathan cleared his throat. "We need to talk." Margaret turned, heart already racing. The way he looked at her, it wasn't like a son looking at his mother. It was cold, distant, like she was an obstacle. "You need to move out," he said bluntly. "Today." She blinked, unsure she heard him right. "What? What do you mean?" "I'm selling the house," he continued, arms crossed. "Amanda and I are moving. There's no room for you in our plans. No discussion. No emotion. Just finality." Margaret's throat tightened. "But where would I go?" Nathan shrugged. "There are shelters, or you can ask one of your charity friends. I'm not your caretaker." Amanda stood in the background, expression unreadable. Margaret felt the floor shift beneath her. She'd lived in that house for 35 years, raised him under that roof, and now she was being evicted by the boy she called son. She packed quietly. No fight, no tears in front of him. Just one small suitcase. She didn't take much, just some clothes, her old photo album, and her cane. Nathan didn't help her carry it. He didn't even say goodbye. As the door clicked shut behind her, Margaret didn't look back. Something inside her had broken, but something else had awakened because she had nothing in her hands but $9.5 million in her name. And now, everything was about to change. What Nathan didn't know, what no one knew, was that long before, she was just an old woman with a cane. Margaret Dawson was a mastermind. Years before adopting Nathan, Margaret had made her mark in the world of real estate. She wasn't flashy, didn't brag, and never craved the spotlight. But behind the scenes, she was sharp, strategic, and fearless. She bought rundown homes, renovated them on tight budgets, and flipped them for incredible profit, all before house flipping was trendy. Her final major deal came 2 years before she adopted Nathan. She sold a cluster of small rental properties she had held for nearly a decade, quietly pocketing a massive multi-million-dollar sum. But instead of spending it, she disappeared from that world entirely. She chose to live small. Simple clothes. An old car with a dent in the door. Her home looked cozy, not expensive. She clipped coupons, went to thrift shops, and never once hinted at wealth. Her neighbors thought she lived off a pension. But in truth, Margaret had $9.5 million. She quietly split the money between multiple private accounts, some offshore, some local, but under different names. She stashed emergency funds in a small safety deposit box downtown, along with gold coins, rare bonds, and original property documents. She didn't want the money to define her. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she had. So she never told Nathan. And when he kicked her out like she was worthless, Margaret didn't argue, because deep down, she knew something he didn't. She could start over any time, and he had just thrown away the biggest blessing of his life. As Margaret sat alone on a weathered park bench, the afternoon sun dipping behind the trees, she knew she had reached a crossroads. She had no home, no son, no plan. But she did have something Nathan had underestimated: strength, wisdom, and the power to write her own ending. She pulled out her small flip phone, yes, the same one Nathan had mocked for being ancient, and scrolled through her contacts. Her finger hovered over a name she hadn't dialed in years but had never forgotten: James Holloway. He wasn't just her lawyer. He was a dear friend. He'd helped her handle every property deal, draft every investment plan, and most importantly, he was the only person who vaguely knew the truth about her hidden wealth. The line rang once, twice. Then a warm, familiar voice answered. "Margaret?" "My goodness, it's been too long." She didn't waste time. "James," she said quietly. "Nathan kicked me out. I'm sitting on a park bench with a suitcase. It's time." There was silence. Then a shift in his tone, calm, serious, protective. "You're safe now. Tell me what you want to do." Margaret's voice didn't shake. She didn't cry. She spoke with clarity that only comes from a broken heart finally letting go. "I want you to change the will. Completely. Nathan is out. Every last cent. I want it to go to something good, something that matters." For years, Margaret had carried a dream close to her heart, inspired by her own journey and the childhood pain she had seen in Nathan's early days. She'd always wanted to create a foundation, one that supported single mothers, helped abandoned children, and gave shelter, education, and second chances to the ones society too often forgot. Call it the Dawson Foundation, she said. I want every dollar, every property, every asset to go to that. James didn't hesitate. It'll be done by the end of the week, he replied, then added with a small, knowing smile. He's going to regret this. Margaret finally exhaled. The weight on her chest began to lift, not because of revenge, but because she was reclaiming her power, turning heartbreak into purpose. That night, James arranged a private hotel suite for her, discreet, comfortable, and temporary, until she decided where she wanted to live next. But Margaret didn't care about houses anymore. What mattered was that her fortune, everything she had worked for, wouldn't be wasted on someone who saw her as a burden. It would change lives. It would speak louder than the silence Nathan had left her with. She had nothing but a suitcase that morning. By nightfall, she had a mission. 2 months later, Margaret Dawson passed away quietly in her sleep. She was surrounded by kind nurses, at a beautiful senior living community, one she had chosen herself and paid for in full. She never complained, never asked for pity. She spent her final days tending to a small garden on the balcony and writing letters to the people who had shown her kindness over the years. But the most important letter? It was the one James Holloway sent to Nathan. It arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope with his name printed in bold. He ripped it open casually, expecting something, maybe a check, maybe an apology. What he found instead froze him in place. Inside was Margaret's final will, now fully executed. Not a single penny left to him, every cent of the $9.5 million gone. Given to the newly established Dawson Foundation to help single mothers and abandoned children. And then, there was her note. You pushed me out when I needed you most. I gave you love, and you gave me pain. My legacy will now serve those who deserve kindness. Nathan dropped the paper. He tried to laugh it off, but the panic set in quickly. His girlfriend left the same week, disgusted. Without Margaret's quiet support, the mortgage on the house fell apart. The lender took it back. His job, already hanging by a thread, was gone within days after showing up late and distracted. He called James, demanded the will be overturned, screamed into the phone, but James simply said she made sure it was airtight, and just like that, Nathan was left with nothing, no home, no money, and no one to blame but himself.